ex-wife tried to take my luxury apartment in the divorce, but she was shocked when I revealed it's just a rental. The gold digger got what she deserved. Back in 2008, I was just starting out at university, trying to get a hang of the whole being an adult thing. Like most people my age, I didn't have much money, but somehow I got lucky. Me and my then girlfriend at the time, let's call her Kate, and our buddy Rob were all on the lookout for a place to live. We were searching for something that wouldn't completely drain our wallets, and after weeks of scrolling through ads, something pretty cool came up. This place was a two-bedroom apartment, right in the middle of the city. Like, the location couldn't get better. Shops, restaurants, campus, everything was right there. The rent? Way below what you'd expect for that area. It almost felt like we'd hit the jackpot, and honestly, we kinda had. The owner of the place had some tough times because of everything happening back then. Economy wasn't great, people losing jobs, that kind of stuff. She lost her job and decided to move abroad, try her luck somewhere else. Since she didn't want to deal with managing the apartment from another country, she made a pretty sweet deal with us. We could live there as long as we took care of the bills and maintenance. It was almost like we owned the place, but we didn't. We were renters, just with a bit more control over things. It wasn't some big fancy arrangement. She trusted us enough to handle everything, and we didn't have to bug her about stuff. In return, we got to live in this awesome spot for a fraction of what most people were paying in that area. So it was me, Kate, Rob, and Rob's girlfriend at the time, all packed into this little two-bedroom apartment. It was tight, yeah, but we made it work. Rob and his girlfriend took one room, and Kate and I had the other. We were all just starting out, so it wasn't like we were picky. We were more excited about having a roof over our heads and a place to crash after late nights of studying or hanging out with friends. I know it sounds crazy, but it really did feel like our own place. Even though we were renting, I was the one handling everything. Bills, maintenance, rent. It was all in my name, and I guess over time I started thinking of it like my apartment. I didn't even consider it weird that I wasn't the actual owner, just the renter. It was all so normal to me. Fast forward a couple years, and things changed. As they do, right? Kate and I broke up. No big drama, we just drifted apart. Happens. Rob and his girlfriend? They decided to move out and get their own place, which left me with the entire apartment to myself. It was a weird shift, going from a full apartment to just me. I mean, I'd gone from sharing a place with 3 other people to being completely alone in the middle of the city. It was quiet, but honestly, I kind of liked it. The rent stayed the same, super cheap for what it was, so I figured, why not just stay? I could afford it on my own now that I had a full-time job. Sure, it was a two-bedroom apartment, but I didn't need to move out just because I was the only one living there. I mean, what are the odds I'd find another place that good for that price? Living alone wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. I had friends over all the time, and the second bedroom became sort of a free Airbnb for people who wanted to crash after a night out or didn't feel like trekking back to wherever they lived outside the city. It wasn't like I was charging anyone or anything. It was just a place for my friends to hang out or spend the night when they needed to. I liked the company, too. Kept things lively. And because I was handling everything like bills, rent, repairs, whatever, it really did start to feel like my own place. It's funny, but I never really thought much about the fact that it was still technically a rental. I'd been there so long, dealing with the landlord directly had become second nature. She trusted me, and I took care of the place like it was my own. At this point, I was basically running the whole show, and I guess that's when I stopped thinking about it as just a rental. The landlord even told me she didn't want to deal with all the paperwork every month, so we made this deal where I'd just handle everything and she'd let me stay. It was all under the table, super low-key, and worked out great for both of us. I paid rent straight to her, and she didn't have to worry about anything else. As long as the money came through and I kept the place in good shape, she was happy. I mean, I wasn't about to complain. It was way cheaper than what anyone else was paying in that part of the city, so why would I rock the boat? So yeah, there I was, early 30s, living solo in this sweet two-bedroom apartment in the city. To everyone else, it probably looked like I had my life all figured out. Great location, nice apartment, steady job. Honestly, I felt pretty content with how things were going. Sure, I didn't own the place, but it was mine in every way that mattered, at least in my head. And that's pretty much how things went for a long time. The apartment became part of my identity, if that makes sense. People would ask me where I lived, and I'd just say, my place in the city. I didn't think much about it. I guess in my mind it was mine, even though legally it wasn't. It's not like I was out here pretending I was some big-shot homeowner. I didn't even really think about it like that. I was just a guy living in an apartment he'd been in for years, paying rent and keeping things running smoothly. It was my home, plain and simple. Looking back, I can see how it might seem odd that I never really mentioned the rental thing to anyone. But I swear, It wasn't intentional. It just didn't come up. I wasn't hiding anything, and I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. It just became part of my routine, my life. Rent paid, bills sorted, friends crashing in the spare room. It all felt pretty normal. But I guess that's where things start getting a bit more complicated. So, fast forward to 2020, life was going pretty well, all things considered. I was still living in the same apartment, still loving the central location, and things were smooth. My job was steady, and I'd gotten pretty used to living solo. But sometimes life just throws people at you when you least expect it. That's when I met Melissa. It wasn't anything super dramatic or love at first sight stuff. We met through some mutual friends at a party. She was cool, smart, and we hit it off pretty quickly. We got into a conversation that just flowed. You know? We were talking about random stuff, travel, work, life, and it felt like we were just on the same page about a lot of things. I could tell she was one of those people who had her life planned out. She had goals, a timeline for everything, which was refreshing at the time. Now, I'll admit, things moved faster than I was expecting. Melissa wasn't shy about wanting to settle down. She made it clear early on that she was looking for something serious. And me being me, I thought, why not? I wasn't getting any younger, and she seemed like she had her life together. Plus, I was kind of swept up in that whole new relationship excitement, where everything feels great, and you don't really stop to think about the small stuff. We started dating pretty seriously, and within a few months, things got even more intense. Melissa started dropping hints about wanting to move in together. I wasn't against the idea. I mean, we were getting along really well, and it felt like the logical next step. The apartment was more than big enough for both of us, and honestly, I thought it'd be nice to have someone around more often. When we talked about moving in, it never really crossed my mind to sit her down and explain every little detail about the apartment. Like, sure, it was technically a rental, but it had been my home for so long that I didn't think it mattered. I was the one handling everything, paying rent, taking care of the bills, all that. In my head, it wasn't a big deal. To me, it felt like my place, and that's what I called it. I never even thought to clarify that I didn't own it. It just didn't seem relevant. So, yeah, Melissa moved in pretty quickly after that. We were officially living together, and for a while, everything was going great. I mean, we had our little routines, cooking together, watching Netflix, the usual couple stuff. She started making small changes around the apartment, adding her own touch to the decor and rearranging furniture. I didn't mind. In fact, I kind of liked that she was making the place feel more like ours, instead of just mine. Now, here's where things started to get a bit tricky. Melissa wasn't just thinking about moving in. She had the whole future mapped out. She was talking about marriage within the first 6 months of dating, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is moving fast. But like I said before, she had a plan, and I was in that phase of just going along with it because, honestly, it didn't seem like a bad idea at the time. By early 2021, we were engaged. Yep, I put a ring on it. Again, it all happened so fast that I didn't really have time to process everything. But I was in love, or at least I thought I was at the time, and marriage seemed like the natural next step. Plus, Melissa was already in full wedding planning mode, and I was just kind of rolling with it. She was excited, and I didn't want to rain on her parade by asking too many questions or slowing things down. Looking back, though, there were definitely moments where I should have pumped the brakes a bit. Like Melissa was always talking about our future and making plans that sometimes didn't even feel like they involved me. She'd talk about buying a house, starting a family, and all this stuff that honestly felt a bit overwhelming. But I was in too deep at that point to really stop and think about whether I was actually ready for all of that. It felt like I was just being swept along in the current. The apartment, meanwhile, became more and more ours in Melissa's eyes. She'd bring up ideas about renovations, maybe knocking down a wall to open up the kitchen or turning the second bedroom into a nursery. I'd just nod along, thinking, well, that's not going to happen. It's not like I could make major changes to a rental apartment, but again, I didn't see the need to explain that. I didn't think it was important. After all, we were happy, right? We got married in mid-2021, and for a while, things were still good. Married life didn't feel that different from living together before. We had the same routines, the same little habits, but there was this slow shift. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way, we started growing apart. It was subtle at first, little disagreements over trivial stuff like what to watch on TV or where to go for dinner. But those small things started adding up. Melissa, who had once been so focused on our future, started spending more time with her friends or going out by herself. Meanwhile, I was still doing the same old thing, working, hanging out at home, keeping things running like I always had. It was like we were living two different lives under the same roof. and neither of us really knew how to bridge that gap. By the time 2022 rolled around, it was becoming pretty clear that we weren't on the same page anymore. We'd have these awkward silences where we'd both be sitting in the same room, but it felt like we were miles apart. The conversations that used to come so easily were now strained, and we were both tiptoeing around the fact that something was off. We tried to fix it, of course. We had those heart-to-heart talks where we promised to work on things, to communicate better, to make more time for each other. But the truth was, we were just too different. Melissa still had her big plans, and I was starting to realize that I didn't really fit into them. I wasn't sure if I ever had. And that's when the talk of divorce came up. Neither of us was happy, and after one particularly rough conversation, we both admitted that maybe this wasn't working out the way we'd hoped. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. We just weren't right for each other. So after just over a year of marriage, we agreed to part ways. We were surprisingly calm about the whole thing. No big fights, no slamming doors. We just sat down like adults and decided to call it quits. We'd tried, but it was time to move on. Melissa made plans to move out, and I figured I'd just go back to living alone in the apartment, just like I had before. But of course, things didn't end there. Not by a long shot. So, after Melissa and I decided to get divorced, things were surprisingly chill for a while. We both kind of just did our own thing, living in the apartment while she made plans to move out. I figured, okay, this is going smoother than I expected. No big fights, no screaming matches, just two people realizing they weren't meant for each other. We were both handling it like adults. At least, I thought we were. I was at work one day, going about my usual stuff, when I got this email from Melissa. I figured it was something about moving or the divorce paperwork, but nope, it was something else entirely. The subject line didn't give much away, just said something like, apartment info. I clicked on it, and there it was, a full-blown real estate valuation report attached to the email. I remember sitting there, staring at my screen for a solid minute, trying to process what I was looking at. Melissa had gone behind my back and hired someone to evaluate the apartment's worth. Like, she actually paid someone to come in, check out the place, and tell her how much it was worth on the market. She didn't mention this to me beforehand, didn't ask if I wanted to be involved, nothing. And then, in the body of the email, she casually dropped the bomb that she expected me to pay her half of the apartment's value once she moved out. I couldn't believe it. I was dumbfounded. Half of the apartment's value? What value? This place is a rental. I'm sitting there thinking, has she completely lost her mind? I thought maybe she was joking, or maybe she misunderstood something. So I took a deep breath and typed out a response, trying not to lose it. I wrote back something like, hey, did I never tell you this place is a rental? I explained that I've been renting this apartment for years and paying everything directly to the owner, and that I don't own anything here. I couldn't just give her half of the value because there wasn't any value to split. It's not mine to sell. I made it clear that I didn't ask her to get a real estate appraisal, and honestly, I couldn't figure out why she thought I could afford to buy out half of a place in the city center. She knows where I work and how much I make. It's not like I'm rolling in cash here. Her response? She didn't take it well, to put it mildly. About 10 minutes after I sent that email, my phone started buzzing like crazy. It was Melissa, and the second I picked up, she started yelling. She was going off about how I had lied to her for years, how I had hidden the fact that we were living in a rental, and how she thought this was our property the whole time. I tried to get a word in, but she was so angry, I couldn't even think straight. She kept accusing me of deceiving her, saying that she would have never moved into the apartment if she had known it was just a rental. I was honestly shocked, because in my mind, it wasn't like I'd kept some big secret from her. The topic just never came up. It wasn't like I sat her down and said, hey, by the way, we own this apartment. I just never thought it was that big of a deal because, like I said, I'd been living there so long, managing everything, it felt like my place. The more she yelled, the more I started getting frustrated. I told her, look, I didn't lie to you. You never asked, and I didn't think it mattered because we were living here just fine. But she wouldn't let it go. She kept bringing up how I'd hid this from her, how I made her think we were building a future together in this apartment we supposedly owned, and that now she felt like everything was a lie. I mean, I get why she was upset, sure, but at the same time, she was acting like I had masterminded this elaborate scheme to trick her. It wasn't like that at all. It just never came up. At that point, I think she was just mad at the whole situation, and the apartment thing was the last straw for her. She started demanding that I pay for the real estate appraisal she'd gotten done on the apartment, which was around 500 euros. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone spends money without asking me and then expects me to foot the bill, that's not how it works in my book. I told her, I didn't ask you to do that. You decided to get an appraisal without talking to me first, so that's on you. Melissa was furious. She kept yelling that I was an asshole, that I'd wasted her time, that I'd lied to her about everything. I was sitting there on the phone just taking it all in, thinking, is this really happening? She ended the call by calling me an a-hole one last time and hung up. But of course, she wasn't done. Nope. The next thing I knew, she was telling all of our friends how I'd lied to her throughout our entire marriage. She twisted the story to make it sound like I'd been keeping secrets from her for years, like I'd been pretending to own an apartment I didn't own just to keep her happy or something. Suddenly, our friend group was buzzing with messages and group chats, people taking sides, debating whether I was in the wrong or if she was overreacting. Some of our friends were sympathetic towards her, saying that I should have told her up front that it was a rental. Others, though, thought she was making a big deal out of nothing and that she should have asked more questions before assuming things. The whole situation turned into a mess, and I couldn't believe this was happening over something as simple as a misunderstanding about an apartment. I talked to my best friend about it, and he couldn't stop laughing. He said, "Dude, you've got to post this on Reddit. People are going to have a field day with this one." And so here I am, asking Reddit, am I the a-hole for not telling my ex-wife that we lived in a rental apartment? Update 1. So, after that call with Melissa, I thought maybe that was the end of it, like we'd both cool off and move on. But of course, I was wrong. She wasn't done with me yet, and neither was our friend's group chat. The whole situation blew up in there, and let me tell you, that group chat turned into a battleground real fast. I woke up the next day to my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was just my alarm, but when I looked at it, there were about 30 unread messages, all from our mutual friend group. You know that feeling when you wake up, check your phone, and instantly know it's going to be a bad day? Yeah, that was me right then. I opened the group chat, and the first thing I saw was Melissa's long rant about how I'd lied to her during the entire marriage. She was going off, telling everyone how I had deceived her, kept secrets, and made her think we owned the apartment when, in reality, it was a rental. It wasn't just a few messages either. It was one of those long, multi-part texts that go on and on. I had to scroll through a wall of text just to get to the bottom of it. She had clearly been up all night stewing over it because the message read like a dramatic monologue. She was throwing around phrases like, "How could he do this to me?" And "I feel so betrayed." She even mentioned the real estate appraisal, telling everyone how she had spent 500 euros, only to find out the apartment wasn't even ours. Honestly, it was like reading a whole soap opera script. Anyway, as I scrolled through the messages, I saw that people had already started chiming in. Some of our friends were jumping in with supportive messages for her like, "Wow, I can't believe he never told you." And "That's so messed up, I'd be furious too." Others were more on my side, saying stuff like, "It's not like he was hiding it, it's just a rental, and I don't get why she assumed they owned it without asking." One of our friends, let's call her Jess, was the first one to try and calm things down. She sent a message saying, "Guys, maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Let's hear both sides before jumping to conclusions." But Melissa wasn't having any of it. She replied almost immediately with, "There's nothing to misunderstand. He lied by omission. He made me believe we owned that place when we didn't." That was when I decided to jump in. I didn't want to, but at this point, I had no choice. I wasn't about to just sit back and let everyone think I'd been this huge liar. So I typed out a response, keeping it as calm as possible considering the situation. I said something like, "Hey guys, just to clear things up, I didn't lie to Melissa. I never told her we owned the apartment, and honestly, it never came up. I've been renting this place for years and handling all the bills, so it just felt like home to me. I didn't think it was something I needed to explain, because to me, it didn't matter. If she had asked, I would have told her." I hit send and waited. The chat went quiet for a bit, and I thought maybe people were starting to see reason, but nope. Melissa fired back with, "You had every opportunity to tell me. We've talked about our future, about maybe renovating or starting a family, and not once did you mention that this wasn't our apartment. How was I supposed to know?" At this point, the chat was blowing up again, and more people started weighing in. It turned into this massive debate about whether I was in the wrong for not telling her, or if she should have asked more questions. My best friend, John, who had been pretty quiet up until now, finally jumped in. His message made me laugh, even though I probably shouldn't have been laughing in the middle of all this. He said, "Guys, let's be real here. Who honestly asks, 'Hey, do we own this apartment?' on a first date? If you're living together, you're probably more focused on figuring out what to have for dinner, not whether you're renting or owning." I was dying. John always had a way of cutting through the BS with his dry sense of humor, and it felt like the first time someone wasn't taking things too seriously. Melissa, of course, didn't find it funny. She snapped back at John, saying, It's not about the first date, it's about trust in a marriage. At this point, the whole group chat was just turning into chaos. Everyone was talking over each other, and it was clear no one was going to agree on anything. Some people thought I should have been more upfront, while others thought Melissa was blowing things way out of proportion. There was one guy, let's call him Mark, who kept trying to play both sides, like, yeah, I can see why Melissa's upset, but I don't think OP meant to lie. It was the classic, let's all just get along approach, which wasn't really helping at all. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I sent one final message. Look, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough about the apartment being a rental, but it was never my intention to hide anything. I thought we were happy living here, and I didn't think it mattered because I've always treated it like our home. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, and I'm sorry if I did. After that, I muted the chat. I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was turning into a back and forth that wasn't going to end well, no matter what I said. People had already picked their sides, and there wasn't much else I could do. Over the next couple of days, I heard bits and pieces about how the conversation had gone on even after I left. Some friends reached out to me privately to say they understood where I was coming from, while others just stayed quiet. Melissa didn't speak to me directly after that, which was probably for the best. I didn't see any point in dragging things out further. Looking back, I still don't think I did anything wrong, but I get why Melissa was upset. I guess, in her mind, the apartment represented something bigger, like security or stability, and finding out it was a rental probably felt like the rug was pulled out from under her. But at the end of the day, it was just an apartment. It didn't define us or our relationship, at least not to me. So, yeah, that's the group chat drama. It wasn't fun, but it gave me a good story to tell. And, I guess in the grand scheme of things, if the worst thing I did in my marriage was not mention the apartment was a rental, then I can live with that. Update 2. After the whole apartment mess blew up in the group chat, I figured things would cool down for a while, right? Like, Melissa had said her piece, I'd tried to explain myself, and the group chat was officially a battlefield I wasn't going to step back into. But of course, that wasn't the end. Not even close. I think it was maybe 2 days after the group chat fiasco when Melissa decided to bring up the car. I should have seen it coming, honestly. Things had gone from who owns the apartment to who's getting what in the divorce pretty quickly. And when it comes to breakups, people love to talk about stuff. Who gets the TV? Who gets the couch? Who's taking the dog? Even though we didn't have one. So the car. I get this text from her in the middle of the day, completely out of nowhere. She was like, I'm taking the car when I move out, and you know it. And I was just sitting there, staring at my phone, thinking, wait, the car? Our car? I mean, technically, we'd both been using it, but it wasn't as simple as her just taking it. Here's the thing. The car wasn't actually ours. It was a lease. I had signed the lease, and we'd been making payments together, sure, but we didn't own it. We were both driving it, using it to get around. But at the end of the day, the car still belonged to the bank. And now she was acting like she could just walk off with it like it was her prize for putting up with me. So, I texted her back, trying to keep it civil. I said something like, hey, you know the car's a lease, right? It's not ours to split, it's the bank's. We still have payments left on it. I figured that would be the end of the conversation. Like, how do you argue with facts? But of course, Melissa wasn't the type to back down. She replied almost immediately with, I don't care if it's a lease, I'm the one who drives it the most. You barely use it, so it's basically mine. I'm taking it when I move out, and you'll figure out how to deal with the rest. Now, this is where things got tricky. Yeah, she had a point. I didn't drive the car as much as she did. I mostly used public transport or walked since I lived so close to everything. And Melissa definitely relied on the car more. But that didn't mean she could just claim it like that. We were both on the hook for the payments, and if she took the car and stopped paying, guess who would be left with the bill? That's right, me. At this point, I was frustrated. I didn't want to get into a fight about this, but I also wasn't about to let her just walk off with a leased car without figuring out who's responsible for the rest of the payments. So I called her. The second she answered, I could hear the tension in her voice. She didn't even say hello, just went straight into, you better not be calling to argue about the car. I sighed, trying to stay calm. Look, Melissa, I'm not trying to argue. I just want to figure this out. The car's a lease, and we still have payments left. If you take it, are you planning on covering the rest of the lease? She let out this exasperated sigh like I was being unreasonable. Why would I cover the whole lease? We got the car together. You should still pay your half even if I take it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She actually expected me to keep paying for a car I wouldn't even be driving. So, you want me to keep making payments on a car I don't have? How does that make any sense? She didn't even hesitate. Because it's your responsibility too. We got it together, remember? Just because I'm taking it doesn't mean you're off the hook. You need to help out with the payments. I was starting to lose my patience. Melissa, come on. If you take the car, it's yours. I'm not going to keep paying for something I don't have access to. That's not fair. There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was going to see my side of things. But nope. She came back with, well, if you don't want to pay for the car, then I'll just give it back and let the bank deal with it. How about that? I couldn't believe it. She was basically threatening to dump the car and leave us both in a worse situation just because I didn't want to pay for her to drive it. That's not a solution, Melissa. If we give the car back, we're both going to have to deal with the penalties for breaking the lease. You really want to do that just to prove a point? She didn't answer right away, and I could tell she was thinking it over. Finally, she said, fine. What if we split the lease until it's up, and then I take it over completely? I considered it for a second. It wasn't a terrible idea, but it still didn't sit right with me. I wasn't sure if I could trust her to keep up with the payments once she took over, and if something went wrong, I'd still be tied to the lease. But at the same time, I didn't want to fight about this forever, so I agreed, sort of. All right, here's the deal, I said. We'll split the payments for now, but once you move out, the car's officially yours. You take over the payments completely, and I'll sign off on it. That's the only way this is going to work. There was another pause, and I could hear her thinking it over. Finally, she said, fine, but you better stick to your word. I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I mean, we'd come to some sort of agreement, but it still felt like a lose-lose situation. I wasn't thrilled about splitting payments on a car I wasn't even using, but at least there was a plan to get out of it eventually. After that, things went quiet for a few days. I didn't hear much from Melissa, and for once, the group chat wasn't blowing up with drama. It seemed like the car situation was settled, for now at least. But knowing Melissa, I wasn't holding my breath. Update 3. So here's a fun twist I didn't see coming. Melissa found out about this Reddit post. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how she found it. Maybe one of our mutual friends snitched, or maybe she was just creeping through Reddit to see if I'd said anything about the whole situation. Either way, she found it, and she was not happy. I was chilling at home thinking things had finally calmed down when my phone started ringing. It was Melissa, and I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. I picked up, and before I could even say hello, she went off. You need to delete that Reddit post right now, she snapped. I can't believe you'd write about our divorce and make me look like the bad guy. I was caught off guard for a second. I mean, I wasn't really dragging her through the mud here. I was just telling my side of things. But I knew trying to explain that to her wasn't going to work, so I stayed calm and asked, why does it matter, Melissa? It's just a post and I didn't even mention your name. No one knows it's you. But she wasn't having any of it. I don't care if no one knows it's me. You're making me sound like I'm some sort of villain, and I'm not going to stand for that. Take it down, or I'll make your life even more difficult. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at that. Honestly, at this point, what else could she do to make things more difficult? We were already arguing about the car, the apartment, and everything else under the sun, so I figured if she wanted to play this game, I could play too. All right, I said, staying calm. I'll delete the post, if you agree to pay me back for your share of the rent while you were living with me. You know, since I was covering everything while you were there. There was a pause. I could almost hear her fuming through the phone. Are you serious? She said, her voice dripping with disbelief. You want me to pay you back for the rent when we were married? You are such an a-hole. I didn't even get a chance to respond before she hung up. Just like that, the conversation was over. I sat there for a second, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Was I really the bad guy for asking her to chip in for the rent? I mean, we were both living there, but I was the one handling everything. Bills, rent, all of it. It didn't seem unreasonable to me, but apparently she thought otherwise. So, yeah, she called me an a-hole and ended the conversation. I guess that means the post stays up. Honestly, I don't see what the big deal is. It's not like I'm lying or making stuff up. I'm just sharing what happened. And if she's mad about it, well, that's not really my problem anymore.